Some post-COVID coughs. But all right. Um, so I've been thinking of making an example application for event source just to try some stuff out and also, you know, show how particular things are done. Like it's always a bit theoretical if you just talk about it and nobody sees it. But if you create an example, then people can look at it. The repository will be public, and every time I sort of have an idea of what to highlight, I'll add a little piece to it. So it's sort of a playground application, so that you know people can also see how it's done. Um, as a first sort of example thing, I was thinking about um doing a onboarding sort of flow and do that event source just to see how it goes. And this sort of added complexity, it might be nice to get a step in there where maybe an admin needs to approve something, and then yeah, I can look at how that's how that would go. As I said before, as I said on Twitter, I'm super rusty, so don't expect a lot of brilliance from me right now because, uh, I'm right now I'm in between jobs, so I haven't been coding a great deal. Excited to start my new job though. That'll be on the 1st of June. So I'm still just holidaying away. I see some people already saying that my excuses should be turned into coding instead. So let's do that just that. Customer onboarding. This is effectively going to be the process from there's nobody on your application to there's going to be somebody using your application, but before that happens, they maybe need to fill out information about themselves, a name, an email. Maybe they need to verify an email. Maybe an admin needs to do an approval if it's a sort of a strict thing. At my previous employer, Molly, what they had there was an extensive onboarding program for people who wanted to use their services, which is a legal obligation. So, and those kind of cases, it's kind of nice to have some more insight into what's happening, what's going on, and whatever. So, event sourcing or anything event based, it kind of makes sense there, especially because onboarding for sort of financial companies is not something that you do once. You kind of have to continuously screen. So the onboarding process might also, after a while you might be onboarded, but if you become too much of a risk factor, you actually might be offboarded automatically because of an increased risk profile. Um, with that, I'm going to try to align my screen so I can also see comments coming in, which should be the case right now. All right. So first, I'm gonna sort of set up the basics here. So what I'm gonna be doing is making sure this is an implementation of an aggregate root. I don't need all of this actually because I'm gonna use the aggregate root behavior trait. Oh, I deleted it too much. All right. There we go. So for people unfamiliar with EventSauce, there's an interface of an aggregate root. It exposes a couple of properties. It has a version. It has the ability to release events and be reconstituted from these events, and there's a default implementation of that, which is just all of those methods, and make sure that sort of the skeleton structure for event sourcing is in place. And so with that in place, I can set up a test. Customer onboard test extends aggregate root test case. We should make a custom aggregate root ID. To string, brilliant, from string, just all right. It's always a little bit of initial setup that you need to do for these kind of things, but as soon as you go, then you're off to the races. If there's anything in particular that you're curious about, just drop a line in the chat and I can see if I can cover those kind of things. Yeah, just let me know. There's always a thing that you need to do is you need to have a handle thing for the given. So that's going to receive an object. If you use command-based things, which I tend to like, and then and then here I can actually set up all of my things. How do you decide what to put in event and what to put in projectors? All right. What's your experience with publishing domain events? All right, so, well, there's a lot to unpack there. All right, there's more. Do you translate to specific published event, publish everything, or something else? All right, this is the area where this touches upon a concept that I've used a couple of times, which is an ACL, so that's an anti-corruption layer. And so an anti-corruption layer can be inbound and outbound, and effectively like if you record events and you expose everything to the outside world, what you get is like normally if you have tight coupling within a domain, you're really, or within code in general, then you're really coupling to the specifics of an implementation. And so if the events are a core part of your implementation, what you get if you expose everything, well, now you've still got a high degree of coupling, but then on an event basis effectively. So what an ACL does is it's sort of a relay. So it receives messages and publishes new messages. And it acts as a barrier between the inside and the outside world. So depending on what you want to do, you can either filter or limit the amount of information that gets through. So you decide what is public and what's not. But because it's a relay, effectively it's a moment in time where you're in the stream of information. You can also use that point in time to translate the information from form A to form B. And this is quite useful because you can do things like double dispatching events of a previous version, for example. So if you are going to change the internals of an event or change the event itself or introduce or replace an event, what you can do is translate it back and actually create a backwards compatibility layer by doing that. So I would say in general, especially if you're working with a team on a project or with multiple teams, and especially if you're publishing events in a cross-context kind of way where you're not both the consumer and the producer, maybe the consumer is a different team. What I would do then is definitely make sure that you keep everything private at first and then only deliberately make things public. Doing that, it's like if a team can just go into your code and expose everything, that wreaks havoc on your code base, and it's generally not very pleasant. So keep things private at first and then publicize later. And an ACL is a perfect mechanism to do that. Anti-corruption layer. So EventSauce ships with a couple of these things in place. So it has at the core there's a relay, and that's basically a type of a consumer. So it receives messages. So it will get a message if there's a filter that disallows the message from being translated at all. That will be the case. You can translate it, and then you can still do a post filter if you want to. But if all else goes through, then it will go from the message consumer itself to the message dispatcher, and the message dispatcher would be the other side. Cool. Yeah, there's a bunch of documentation. I'll post a link in the chat about this on the website. And let's see, where did I put this? Here. All right. Cool. Well, good question. As Pim said, a simple one to start off with. It's a little bit of a trick question, I think, in that area, because it's quite an advanced. I've listed it as an advanced topic on the documentation as well. It's something that you really have to know. All right, onboarding tests. I'm going to use a service, and that is cool. Yeah. All right, it's a topic that Pim himself is affected by. So, well, glad to help. I'll send an invoice, Pim. All right. mm. This method doesn't exist yet, but we can make it so. This is always a debatable point. It's like sometimes people who are really into CQRS, they say that anything that you do with a command or a command handler or anything can't return a result. I'm not really in that school of thought. All right, so well, if I set this up like this, I can say given start application start simple. Then this is what I expect. Application was started. Of course, this is going to fail because we actually don't have these things. Let's see. Yeah. Can just inline that. So, well, you can always look at what you find relevant in these kind of cases. So for now, I'm gonna just say that we're gonna have a start date, time, application start date. There's a question from Andreas. What is your favorite event store DB? So I've worked with Event Store DB, which is a functional database for event sourcing. I have had a horrible experience with that, so I wouldn't recommend using that. But any sort of relational database is especially good for storing events for reconstitution. Then afterwards, if you want to consume it in a different way, relay it to whatever you want, it's fine. But really, the asset properties of a database like that are really the things that you want if you want to maintain consistency. You don't want to get exposed to race conditions, or at least want to have the tools to be guarding yourself against these kind of race conditions. So, for example, what you have in Postgres is advisory logs, which are session-bound logs, which are different from transaction-bound logs. So a database session, you can compare it to having a connection to a database. And if you have a lock on that, that means if you have a session, you get the advisory lock. Any other session may not get the same lock. And the reason why it is, in my opinion, better than a transaction-based lock is that you have the ability to have actual multiple commits that are actually committed to disk within that same lock time. So you start an operation, and sometimes you need different points in time where you need to need to lock or need to commit something to the database. But in between, you don't want to have the hassle of restarting an application. Then you also need to recheck, like, hey, is it still in the right state? So there's a lot less guarding that you need to do in those kind of cases. So an advisory lock is quite nice then. One, because it's bound to the same database that you have. So what you can get as well is sort of a Redis-based mutex, but with Redis-based mutexes, you always have the risk of out-of-lock processing, which is if your procedure that you're running is taking a lot of time and your lock is actually already expired, what you can get is that another process might start, the lock is expired, the original process is still busy, but the new process comes in and thinks like, hey, I don't have a lock, or I've been able to acquire the lock, therefore I can now do stuff with this model, which again might create conflict and race conditions, which puts you back into square one in the original problem. So, it's a thing to think about. But maybe it's a little bit off topic, Andreas, but uh, Postgres or MySQL or Maria for me is all fine. As long as it's compliant for reconstitution, this is really what you want to get. All right. Am I doing this right? Okay. Onboarding service. Onboarding test. All right. So there's a couple of ways that you can do this. I'm just going to keep this for now. All right. What does Andreas say? Great answer. Very interesting. If you want event store to be. Yeah, so the thing with event store to be, like without elaborating too much, I used it at when I worked for let's call it a airport near Amsterdam. They used it there, and it was so unstable that they had to um, take down Event Store every day at night, clear the entire storage of that database, and restart it and get all of the information that was contained in it back from other sources. So there were sort of bulk restore endpoints for all the different types of things that were there, while event storage should be a great means to do disaster recovery on. But because this thing was so unstable and unreliable, we needed all kinds of other methods in order to do disaster recovery, which was not fun and not needed. So I end up like this was not a PHP based project. This was a TypeScript RxJS project. And so what I replaced it with was Apache Kafka and Node. We basically recreated that. I did that in, I think, like design and scoping and everything was done in 6 weeks, I think. Like a single person doing that, who was me. And then, yeah, well, the throughput went through the roof, and the stability was also like instantly fixed. So that was quite great. Anyway, back to this. Um, all right, I need to configure. I never understand why I need to reconfigure PHP unit every time. Ah, you can't even see that I'm configuring this. All right, so the pop-ups are not showing in the on the stream. Nice. I always have to do a couple of tries to see. Why doesn't it work? It's like, it would be great if PHP unit would just auto detect the PHP unit configuration, put it in the current directory. I don't know why it doesn't do that. All right, please work. All right. Test listener does not exist. What the hell is this? Right, I have a weird thing where I don't like the tests in the test directory. I just like my tests wherever they are. Alright, this does not exist. And then what? Let's see. Oh, if there's one thing I hate about Symfony is that it tries to be smart around what PHP unit does. And I think that's the absolute worst. Alright, I just need to find wherever this is being called. If anybody has any suggestions why this is popping up. Yeah, I agree with you, Matt. It is a source of pain and frustration. All right, you know what? I'm just gonna say vendor auto load. Then see if I can run it then. It might be that Symfony itself is trying to do this. How annoying. I don't. Why is this happening? It's using the dist. Alright. There we go. Alright. Alright. One failure. Yeah. Oh, dog fooding your own tools is so great. Edit anyway. What is this? What is this? Ah, I know what this is. So the given is to set the preconditions and all right, none returned. Yeah, well, dump and die is definitely my game if I don't need to do any weird stuff. Unrelated question: if you need to build up state within a reactor, properties that are not available within a specific event, they were a reactor. What's a reactor? Is that like a message consumer? Well, I'm going to assume that it is something that listens to events and then needs to do something. So it is perfectly fine for a message consumer to have some state of its own, and that's totally okay. Um, uh, a common term for that is that something is like a process manager is something that receives events, then builds up some state of its own, and then actually use that historical knowledge to guide a process. Maybe so. So, for example, in a case that we had at Molly was if you are processing credit cards. Molly actually has redundancy in suppliers that they have are connected to and allow you, even if one of these processors is down, to still process credit card transactions. So in order for you to be able to accept credit card payments, you need to be onboarded with that particular supplier. And so the payment capability credit card processing unlocks if one of these suppliers is actually onboarded for you as a merchant. And so, but what if happens if we onboard and offboard, right? So if we onboard and with the first you unlock the capabilities, but with the second one, well, actually nothing really changes for you, right? So similarly, if you onboard, if one of the connections, like for example, one of the suppliers increases their KYC level, so you need to actually provide more information. So for the time being, you cannot process any credit cards with that supplier. So you get a notification from that supplier saying, well, we've offboarded or we've disabled this account, but does that really disable also your payment capabilities? Well, no, right? So in that case, it's good to hold some intermediate state to check, like, hey, I'm getting this offboarding or um, temporarily disabled connection with the supplier. But what does it do for my payment capabilities? Well, nothing, right? So you still have one of the two, so you don't need to signal the rest of the system that you're unable to process credit card transactions. So that's a little bit of how you can handle that and where that intermediate state is helpful. I hope that answers the question, Luke. If not, feel free to ask any follow-up questions. All right. All right. Luke says, Reactor was what you said. Would there be any harm in building that event state up on the fly from events versus persisting it? No, no. It's, usually these kind of things they 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 note a decision that has been made, and that decision that results in the reactor state. Um, so and often because like it's going to be relatively simple things like if this and that, then if A and B, then C, or something like that, right? So yeah, it's okay. You can if you want hold internal state, but usually it's a lot more simpler. And then having the history sort of replay is not something that you really benefit from. While from an aggregate root, this is often where you benefit from this, because there's a lot of decision related complexity. It's a um, with with an aggregate root, it's mostly a decision model, and a consumer is more an if this then that model, which is inherently a lot more simple. All right. All right. And this is where I tend to use some interfaces for commands, onboarding commands. The problem here is that like either you need to trust that this method is there, but it's super simple to just put an interface for this, say onboarding ID, capitalize that. On, that's wrong. All right. That also highlights that we don't have the ID at all here. Wait, I'm making my event command, which is not correct. I need to look at this one. Onboarding ID. So any fun stuff that you're working on yourself? Anybody using event source right now for their work? And if so, what are they working on? N9N, is that a keyboard jitter, Andreas, or is that some code that I should be able to decipher? All right, back to the service. Rename that. All right. So Robert says that he's migrating from Spazi's event sourcing lib to event source. How's that going? Maybe in the chat you can elaborate maybe on the reasons for that. Andreas slapped his laptop on the floor. All right. Hope it's okay. I still have a post-COVID cough, and it's super annoying. Um, Too much magic, yeah. So I try to get the most magic out of event source, just like looking at the interfaces and thinking like, hey, how can it be as simple as they can? And that does sometimes mean that you need to do a little bit more work, that there's less out of the box, but that also means that whatever you need to create yourself is quite simple to do. So for example, for this, I already created some things. So for example, something that dispatches to RabbitMQ, which is just this, right? So it's like the amount of work to create this is abysmal, almost nothing. Same for relaying from RabbitMQ to back to, or porting that to event source is almost no work. All right. Yeah. So I think some of the things that Spatie does better than event source is that it gets you up and running like super quick, almost no investment up front. But yeah, flexibility down the line is really where event source I think shines. So yeah, that's well, it's good that you have alternatives, and there's also a huge market for easy entry stuff, right? So that's always good. All right, back to Bizu. So something I always do when I'm event sourcing myself is, and this might be a little bit controversial for some, like whenever there's an exception, I always say that you still need to persist all of the events that you have had. So, and this is because it's very interesting to have a failure state And an exception is also a good way to highlight the domain constraint. So, for example, um, if you have like a budget manager or whatever, and somebody's going over budget, you might raise an exception when they try to do a purchase that is more than the amount that they've got left in their balance, right? So if balance is below or balance is not above the amount that you want to spend, then what you actually do is raise an exception, right? But what if you also record an event? And that event is actually very nice for business analytical purposes, where you look at like how many people are overspending or whatever. Like maybe you want to offer them budget management things, or maybe if it's like a corporate account, then maybe that person's budget needs to be raised. And like, hey, person A has reached their limit every month on the 10th day already, and you keep upping their account, but maybe you should just increase their budget just altogether, right? So having that insight, not only from a modeling perspective, is nice because you can see like, hey, how many times do the guards actually trigger, but also from a customer-facing point of view, business-facing point of view, you can actually look at those things and maybe respond to that. So that's why if there's an exception coming out of this, then you can still persist the events. All right. Customer onboarding event not found. What's this? What happened there? The same here. How did that happen though? All right. All right, so now we are here. Effectively, the only thing that we need to do to make this green is that we say and this is a nice thing, right? So ignore this for now. If people want, I can maybe share. Like Marijn Huistveld gave me some shortcuts, like templates, live templates, where you can do all of these kind of nifty things. Where, like, if you saw the apply, then what it does, it suffixes the apply function with whatever is in the first argument, which is kind of neat, right? So it's a little bit of a productivity thing. All right, so what's different? Right. All right. So here you see that the comparison between the events are not um, are not done in the way like so. There's a precision problem. All right, Federico. Hi Frank, thanks for the stream. Are you going to explain how to handle projections and rebuild those in the future? Yeah, I could do that. I know that Robert has a long-standing wish to get replayability of projections as a baked-in functionality in event source. I'm still undecided on how to approach that because there's a couple of strategies that all have their trade-offs, and they rely heavily on the infrastructure that you have. So, for example, do you have an item potency guard in place, or how do you route those kind of things? What happens to the current projection? Do you block that from reads as well? Do you clear it? How do you go about it? It's like under load. Like, hey, what does this look like? Is it blocking things? Is it not? Um, if you use Kafka, then you don't need a redelivery mechanism for those kind of things because you can just reset your offset and replay just by reconsuming the entire event log that's persistent on your Kafka instance. There's all those kind of questions that you need to answer yourself on how to do that, and I still haven't found something that is silver enough of a bullet to really commit to that. But there might be a case for actually uh, making a generic simple case, but not saying that it is used for everything. And Robert already has a PR open that can work as the basis of that. Right. Federico says, I'm trying to apply event sourcing to our domain, but I struggle to find resources that explain or give examples on how to do it with pros and cons. So when you're referring to it, does that mean event sourcing in general or the replaying of projections? So I'm just going to use this same. All right, so in general, no worries. English is also not my first language, so I'm also not a native speaker by any stretch of the imagination. I still stumble over words, so no problems there. Um, so event sourcing in general is like the barrier of entry is a little bit higher, as you see today. Like you need to do some setup. Um, And right, we've made that green, so that's great. Um, uh, you need to do some setup, and you need to actually do a little bit of an upfront investment in that. Um, if it's your core domain and if really what happens inside it is worthwhile to want to know how it works, and if it's very sort of things happening at certain points in time, you really want to know what has happened, then I think it's always a worthwhile investment to check out. But for example, for logging systems like authentications or authorizations or a blog, then generally not super helpful. Um, is it a mandatory thing? Also, no. I do think there are certain situations where it shines in particular. So, for example, if you have a lot of complex business processes that are related to each other, and something needs to happen, if some other process, if something happens inside some process, then it's quite nice. Also, based on the events, you can create these projections, which allows you to scale the read side a lot easier than it is with state-based decision model. So classic entities, you get your state, and that is effectively your state of your object is a state in the database, and vice versa. And if you want to project it, you basically do a query on it and either fetch it and then translate it into something else. But then you always have the question of how do I keep things updated, right? So with event sourcing, there's a lot more tools that you can use there. All right, built on top of WordPress and a big pile of spaghetti code. Well, that's I'm based on your last name and a little bit on your first name. I'm gonna assume that you're from Italy, so maybe spaghetti code is not as is not as bad for you. Sorry for the pun, but I couldn't resist. Uh, yeah. All right. Cool. What else? Um, yeah, sorry, people. I've been stuck inside of my house, so there's not a lot of people that can now appreciate my puns, and my old colleagues will know that my reservoir of puns is never ending. So yeah, just gonna check Twitter really quick. All right. Uh, all right. Let's imagine that this thing actually has a couple of pages attached to it, and we're gonna do a couple of things. Um, so I test supplying generic or personal information. Stefan, once we manage to move from WordPress to another center of the application to only have, yeah, yeah, that works. I think you can even like use WordPress as just purely as a backend and disregard the entire front end. But like I have to say, I haven't touched WordPress in so long. I don't even know if that's accurate anymore. All right. That's correct after all. All right. Some people are really good at typing while they are speaking, but that's not the case for me. First name. Last name. I really like my shortcuts. I wish there was a shortcut for. Oh, ah, why can't I just do that for everything? Anyway, wait. With these things, I can also just do read only, right? And I don't need the getters. And they can be public. Cool. Mm-mm. With some of these things, it is really easy is that you can just duplicate whatever you have on the other end. Just use it for your events. Another question from Federico. Do you feel functional programming helps with the adoption of event sourcing, or given your background, FP is not something that you care about? Um, I think it kind of helps you to understand how to get from point A to point B. So like reducing over a set of steps or a set of payloads that you get in order to get the state that you use to make a decision is something that's not really foreign in functional programming. Although we apply that in an object-oriented environment right now, it is a concept that if you know functional programming, that you're more familiar with that. So, in that case, it helps, but I don't consider it a strict requirement. Something that I sometimes see popping up is people wanting to do all kinds of assertions in the from payload methods. And while I get that, because this is often what people do when they self-serialize, just remember that if you're persisting something into a database using like either Doctrine or Eloquent, then you never say, well, I now need to recheck all the properties that they have in my model to see if they're okay after I've sort of reconstituted that from the main database. So I tend to leave that out. Just a side thing. All right, back to the test. Now it's going to be red, of course. What is happening? Why is this thing? Is it because I messed up? Okay, now retry. It's like I think I messed it up once, but all right. Oh, yeah. Mm, mm. I should figure out how to have some soundtrack behind this. Otherwise, it's just you watching a silent dude write some code. Um, so this is always something. I'm curious how you people do this. Like sometimes what I do is like if the command is like one on one, I just treat it as a value object and send it over. Um, but sometimes I explode it into whatever type of thing that needs to be. So like, I explode it into first name, last name, and then command date of birth, and then let that be it, or create a value object out of it. But then for now I'm just gonna go with this. All right, here we can actually start off with a non-guarded thing. All right. Yeah. All right. That's correct. Customer. Oh yeah. Of course. Customer. Yeah. Sometimes like I like having codes that sort of tells me what to do. So an error like this, like all right, I can just say apply personal loss, recorded, ignore this for now, and then it's fine. Yay, we're green. All right, so now what we can do is actually add a business rule here. So I'm gonna say create a test. Um, Trying to supply an invalid date of birth. All right. Uh, This extends a runtime exception. All right. I would add the parsing validation to the infrastructure layer, not at the domain. So which parsing validation are you referring to right now? Right, this is great. Uh, uh, um, all right, there we go. Something like that. What else? What else? Maybe we should add an email here. Because then people can use that to log in. Alright. Let's see how we're doing on the tests. Too few. All right, where? Here. That makes sense. Yeah, definitely. Robert asks, aren't those information provided events prone for versioning, like adding, removing a lot of properties there? That's certainly the case for these kind of things. Happens often. Um, with onboarding processes, it's usually not so bad um, because um, it's not a very long running thing, right? You go and you want to get an account, and if requirements change, then probably you're going to be asked in the same process to resubmit, but it's not something that you really deal with for a very long period of time. At the end, this the onboarding process stops, and then you get an account, and then what do we do with the rest of the process? Well, we can kind of disregard it, sort of throw away these old events. Maybe there's even a policy that says, well, if you have an onboarding process for so long that it hasn't been in use, it's not usable anymore, and people just need to redo that. Or did you use it as templated information to restart another customer onboarding process? But yeah, it's um, it's not super difficult to deal with that in general. All right, we're back to green. Nice. All right, auto formatting works. Yeah, so like also this part, right? So we've got the service clause, which is just a concrete clause with the handle thing that currently doesn't return anything. Um, it might bubble up an exception, but that's kind of it. Um, what you can also do is use a command handling thing inside of this if you feel like it, if that's sort of your jam. Um, I tend to start out without because I like just seeing it all here, and also you have to do less wiring, less magical routing. Uh, so yeah, that's what I tend to start out with. All right. Refactor it to a match case. Well, that's match. I haven't used match so much because I haven't been on 8 yet for a couple of projects. So how would that work with match? Match. It doesn't do instance off, right? Yeah, so what's the problem with that, right? You get class, and then you get the command class, and then you say, is it case, or is it just, I really haven't used match so much. I'm gonna look it up. Match. All right, so then you get start application class, and then you do onboarding process start application. But here comes the funny part. You don't know anything more about this, right? So if you say, if this is record personal information, and then you want to do that, first name, How does it know this? Is this PHP unit being smart? All right. Well, today I learned. What is default? All right. All right, this is magic, but you know, it's also PHP, so yeah, cool. All right, so then we should still be able to run all of this and work, right? Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. I honestly did not have a clue that it was this smart. All right, maybe it's kind of cool to say to see if we can do a interaction with an external service, sort of emulate that. Um, so, for example, let's say our personal information needs to be vetted or something like that. So, vetting vetting personal information. So we've got something here. Um, personal information vetting is the interface like function. Yeah, this comes to the point where I want to create a value object out of this, but I'm gonna create that top level personal information, and then constructed string first name, string last name, string email, string date of birth, initialize properties. All right. Yeah, I will publish this information on GitHub. There's already a repository, but I will share it for sure. Let me look up the link. It's here. All right. Let's say for now that this is just something that will return true or false, depending on the input. And then all right. Then we're going to create an in-memory implementation. I'm just making all this stuff up on the fly, so mm, private array. I quite like the named variable things because for these kind of things, like the third one is false. Like, what the hell does it mean? Like, for this, first and second, you can kind of guess. Like, oh, you need to check if something is in some type of array. But yeah, for the strict one, all right. Public function is we need some way to make something valid. Getting all kinds of emails on the background. Should have canceled that noise. Not sure if you hear it though, but let's say that we've got a concrete or a production personal information vetting or a so for example, if there's a list of people that you can't do business with, you could implement that here. It's too bad that you can't see those overlays with this type of screen sharing. It's like it's better to just share an entire screen. So note that for the second time that I do this live coding. But for now, we're gonna just have to stick with this. And let's say I am not allowed to do this. If I am from an incorrect year, like something like that. All right. I'm really amazed by that strict thing because normally I'm quite a sucker for having like type narrowing, and I know that this is just something that PHP Storm. I wonder, does PHP Stan also use this as type narrowing? Like, if you would run this through PHP Stan, would it Would it pass? Would it complain? Would it know the type? Does anybody know? So the thing I wanted to show is the following. Um, you can kind of stage where the system will go if you have a concrete implementation and a memory one, if you base them off of the same test case. So you kind of build a chain of trust where you have a contract and you have two implementations and they both comply with the contracts. That means they're somewhat interchangeable. There might be some deviations in terms of what they actually do. So one might do HTTP traffic and the other might not. But still, functionally, they kind of should be able to be interchangeable. By doing that, you can replace whatever is costly within a code base with whatever is not costly. So I'm going to make an example of that right now, and then yeah, we can dig into that. So the first step for such a thing is that we have a base test case. And a base test case is an abstract class that extends the test case thing, which has a protected, abstract protected function for and then a couple of test cases. So it does not allow invalid people. Personal information. I don't like this. I like maybe sanction list. Yeah, I'm not gonna do this one. All right. So if we have this and we have valid personal information, and I'm gonna get that from here. All right, so this is the setup, and then the result is vetting for application. Then we assert this to be true. And it allows, all right, name it accordingly. And then the inverse is and I'm also going to make sure that this is inversed so that it operates in the same way. That's a deny list instead of an allow list. All right. Let's see. And then here we're going to make a test case for the memory one. Right. That's going to extend the test case. All right. So it's false for the other one, of course. Cool. So this works. All right. And then we need one for the sanction list, which has static stuff in there. Not a PHP file, PHP class. Of course, now this is both in memory, right? So the actual difference does not really matter all that much. But the idea is that one of these, and that would be this one in this case, because they abide the same contract, you can now use them interchangeably. And this is just illustrating of the concept that if you have something that is very heavy to compute or might rely on external services, that in your normal code, what you would do is rely on the one that actually calls out to the external service. But for testing purposes, you actually use something that you fixate, right? So now we can use this and say, mm, mm, invalid personal information is rejected. So here we need to actually look at our setup, right? Because now what we rely on here is also going to want to have a new dependency. So private, we need information vetting as a new dependency. Let's see. Maybe this is the place where I actually want to go and introduce that value object now. Mm. Nice. All right. All right. And we're still green. Nice. Nice. This is also what I like about those event-driven test cases. Like you can do radical refactors, like changing these kind of things out, and things just remain relatively stable because it's just um, events recorded in the past, commands that are just pure information with intent added as a intent, an instruction for the system, and then what you get out is again a list of events. So everything that's in between, whenever, is just always gonna uh, kind of work. So that's great. Mm. All right. All right. I do need to actually fix this because we actually didn't run these tests, which are gonna fail because of the constructor. Too few arguments. All right. So this. Um, mm, so here we take the staged, the one that we have in memory, add it as a property. I'm actually gonna use that as a before. Mm, all right, what's happening? Ah, that exception does not yet exist. failed to detect that this was the case. Well, that makes sense, right? So now we're going to say now we're going to say that this personal information vetting, disallow information, we're going to say new personal information that we're going to disallow, which is Frank de Jonge. And now we're not tied anymore to whatever is allowed in the original one. But we can trust it now, so that's great. All right, so now we need to actually go and enforce it. And this is my strategy for doing this. It's like we're at an entity level here right now, right? So how do you actually model behavior with internal consistency while still being connected to the outside world? So I always think that that's an interesting thing to think about. So the thing that I do is that I do method injection of the thing that I'm interacting with. So I'm not depending on this information, but I am interacting with this external service. So here we're going to depend on information vetting, and we're actually going to pass it down to the guard. And here, what we're going to do is say if not vetting application, so invalid personal information was provided. And here you also see that, so for example, although the response types are different within these kind of things, like this is a Boolean return and this is an exception, right? At this point, it puts you in a place where you can actually adapt one of these worlds to another. So, for example, if information vetting would expose an exception, well, is it really nice to expose that through the service? Because then you know you kind of depend on something, and then the internal logic kind of leaks into the outside world. And so, even if this was an exception, what you could do was actually get that exception, translate it into something else, and then you have an abstraction level exception defined, which is more bound to the use case that you want to expose to your users rather than the use case of your dependency. And so this makes your abstraction more stable and more easy to use. So it's really expressive about what's happening. So if at any point in time, right, if you're using, like there's multiple services available for vetting sanction lists for like politically exposed people or known criminals or whatever, stuff like that, right? But sometimes you switch provider, and if then all of the area where you actually do these things, you need to change out all of these exceptions, right? That's a little bit more of an hassle than you would want that to be, just because the internals of your service are leaked out, or internals of your model are leaked out towards the rest of the consumers of the model. So that's not really great. So instead, what you can do is actually convert those exceptions into something that's meaningful for your domain. And so every time this happens, the expense is null and void. So I think that's very powerful. It's a very cheap thing to do, something that you do have to keep in mind when you do it. But it's relatively cheap, and the return on investment there is often there. Just a side nugget of information. All right. Oh yeah. So now we need to forward this. Yeah, and there we go. So this is sort of the standard pattern that I use to integrate with the external services. So within your service, or be it a service class or a command handler setup, you depend on something that exposes that capability that you want. You model it in a way that it's relevant for you. Often create a sort of duplicate of that, where you know the information is in your control, and then you can use that for testing, and then you actually go on and use that throughout your entire code base like that. And so then you depend on it like here, and then forward it to the method where actually the behavior of the thing that you want to model is modeled. Yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it for now because I've been doing this for, well, um, almost 2 hours, and I've got a dinner that I need to get to at the end of the day. So yeah, so far what we've gotten is the basic setup of event-sourced application with the test suite. We've got an external module that we integrate with that uses contract testing in order to make sure that we can use an in-memory variant in the way that we can trust it like the real thing, using contract testing, as I said. And we integrate that into the event sourced model. I learned that you can have the match get class thing, and then PHP Storm is smart enough to actually figure out what kind of methods are exposed there. So thank you for that suggestion. Yeah, that's about it. So thanks for watching, and I'll schedule a new stream shortly. All right, see you.